Hello everyone and welcome. In this recording, I'm going to be speaking about this upcoming partial lunar eclipse taking place in the sign of Taurus on the 28th of October 2023. Now, like any eclipse, it is a moment of reset. So perhaps it's not the easiest of energies, and given the global context, we can very easily anticipate that it will culminate something or it will escalate something. Yet there is still a lot of hope because after an eclipse, which is like a reset, when you reset your computer, yes, of course, the running apps and programs and the operation system, or how you call it, is lost temporarily because you cut out the power, but it will reboot and it will reload everything fresh and new, so giving a fresh and new perspective. And similarly, the eclipses work just like that, where after the reset, it will really depend on us what we do with the fresh and cleared out energy. Now, another consideration is that the ancients understood eclipses as moments of crisis because the veil between the worlds is that much thinner. So karma plays out in a much more intense way than it usually does. And finally, we are in the period where Pluto is making its final move in the sign of Capricorn. So Pluto is already direct and it is slowly but surely picking up speed, finishing its job in the sign of Capricorn, where January next year, 2024, it will permanently enter into the sign of Aquarius, not to return into Capricorn in a very significant way ever in our lifetime. So this makes this window of time extremely intense, extremely heavy, and extremely karmic. But that doesn't mean that fresh and new hope is not going to arise after the eclipses finish and Pluto, of course, finish their jobs. Now, I would like to share my screen with you to look at the astrology of the eclipse. Uh, First of all, this is not really a very precise eclipse, even as the name suggests, partial lunar eclipse. So there isn't a lot of precision here, which normally wouldn't make this eclipse all that much impacting, all that much, ground shattering, ground Taurus, earth sign, fixed earth sign. Yet the other planets, and in the specifics of their dance, will definitely make this very intense. So this eclipse takes place at 5 degrees and 9 minutes of the sign of Taurus, and it's a lunar eclipse, meaning that it's a full moon. The sun is opposing the moon. The sun being in the sign of Scorpio, and the moon, of course, in the opposite sign of Taurus. Now, the fact that this lunation is very close to the nodes of the moon makes it an eclipse, but the nodes are in different signs. So the south node is in Libra and the north node is in Aries. So this would make the eclipse not all that much, impacting. I don't want to say powerful. Yet, as I said earlier, other aspects make it very, very intense. So, this is almost like juggling with the energy. As you can see, the north node, actually you cannot see yet. Let me just put on the dwarf planets. So the north node is conjunct planetoid Aries, and also a fictional planet, a fictional energy, let's say white moon Selena, is around 26 degrees of the sign of Aries. So this makes it very, very impactful. Aries is the goddess of discord, rebellion, uprising, demanding rights, sovereignty, not playing by the rules. All of these are very much specific to Aries, and she is in the warrior, the assertive sign, fiery sign of Aries, yes. And Aries is ruled by Mars, god of war, basically. So I do believe I don't need to interpret these symbolisms because it's very, very self-explanatory, and we can see this play out, unfortunately, on the world stage. So even this fact makes it quite intense, and we must not forget that the nodes of the moon are squared by Pluto, Pluto being in the sign of Capricorn, so top-down authority, governments, leaders, big corporations, everything that is basically above us in hierarchy and power. And as I said, and many other astrologers, all throughout this period, so even ignoring the eclipses, this Pluto squaring the nodes of the moon, one way or another, it demands from us, both individually and collectively, to reclaim, to embrace our power, and any power that we might be squandering, to take it back as we can. So again, we are seeing this play out on the world stage in a very, very clear manner. So I'll revert to a simple chart, not to confuse you. So this full moon basically doesn't hold very, very precise aspects. So this makes it, how should I say, very susceptible. It can play out in a number of different ways, because if certain aspects would be very, very precise with, mathematical precision, then we could narrow it down to, a couple of different versions. But as you can see, first of all, the moon is very close to Jupiter. I personally wouldn't really call this a conjunction, but maybe other astrologers would, because it really depends on the tolerance of the orb. For me, this is not really a conjunction, yet still, even I cannot ignore that the moon in Jupiter's vicinity, especially in the present context, is very, very important. On one hand, Jupiter is the planet of expansion, so it is enough to expand the effect and the symbolism of the eclipse. And also at the same time, Jupiter is the planet which rules law, legislation, justice, and in the sign of Taurus, all of this, financially speaking, values, stability, and basically Taurus basic needs. And in the present context, let me just say the key word: basic needs in a humanitarian sense. That kind of describes, I don't need to interpret this further. Now, also, the sun is very close to Mercury and Mars, because at the time of the eclipse full moon, we have a Mercury conjunct Mars. Now, this Mercury conjunct Mars is very, very important. Mercury is the planet of mind communication in the very, very intense, forceful, but also investigative, truth-seeking sign of Scorpio. Mars is the ancient ruler of Scorpio, meaning that it's very, very powerful and very comfortable in an intense way here. So you can imagine that this plays out in so very many different ways, in a multilateral way. Like, this represents seeking the truth, digging very, very, very deeply of what is truth, what is fake, what is lies, and to uncover secrets, because Scorpio rules secrets, any type of secrets, but especially secrets which have to do with the rich and the powerful, and political secrets and all of that. Mars, again, I have to say, god of war, so that is very, very self-explanatory. This means investigations, but this also means a lot of communication, a communication which is very, very impacting, because Mars makes an impact. Mars is the planet of initiation, expressed willpower, and as I said in previous horoscopes, in the sign of Scorpio, that is where there's no stopping Mars. There is no stopping the action. There is no stopping the will. Now, how this plays out in a collective sense, it is very, very obvious. Yet still, Mercury conjunct Mars, as I said, it will really attempt to dig deep and uncover what is the truth. And of course, Mercury conjunct Mars, the intensity of it can be used in a very positive way. For example, certain truth can simply not be denied, and the truth sets all of us free. And also at the same time, this is where, for example, things that have to do with humanitarian law, human rights, things which, legal things, of course, which are meant to keep a certain kind of stability intact. This Mercury and Mars opposes Jupiter, planet of justice. So this kind of suggests to me that certain laws, if not human laws, then divine laws, can simply not be surpassed, not even by this Mars. But at the same time, when we have an opposition, there is a chance for the two sides of the extremes, opposition ultimately, to play out. And with an opposition, our job is to find the compromise, to find the middle path. So this is exactly how I think it will play out. Jupiter, again, the law, Mercury and Mars, action that needs to be taken. So this may represent a compromise. This may represent an agreement. This may represent that certain things can simply not surpass or not negate humanitarian laws. Why humanitarian? Because as I said earlier, Taurus is our basic needs. So basic needs cannot be, let's say, cut off. But Jupiter is the planet of expansion, so it can also expand Mars and Mercury. So Mars and Mercury in the sign of Scorpio, the most negative expression can be manipulation, can be forcing certain things, certain events, people to have one kind of opinion or the other by presenting facts, communication, results of investigation, Mercury, in a way that will lead to a very, how should I say, predetermined conclusion. So in other words, manipulation. So we must keep in mind that Jupiter can expand this. But, I spoke about these aspects, but not really the eclipse. So the eclipse is really positive in this sense because there is a chance to, as I said, reset this, to cut the power from this. And any kind of new moon, so including a lunar eclipse, sorry, full moon, including a lunar eclipse, is a culmination. It can shed light to something. Now, you might say that isn't the moon covered in darkness? Yes, absolutely. But after the darkness, the reset, power and light, truth comes back online. So this is where after a moment of darkness, there is light again. So this is exactly the most positive expression, because whatever this Mercury and Mars will do, uncover secrets or present certain facts, results of investigation, or very strong battle in courts of justice, international courts of justice, for example, there is light at the end of the tunnel after these events unfold and play out. Now, other aspects is that this moon holds a trine, which is, of course, not very exact. It is very wide, yet a trine is still a trine, with Saturn in the sign of Pisces. Now, to me, this is the saving grace because Saturn brings stability. Pisces represents, in a way, a spiritual truth. Pisces can represent the past, but from a spiritual, humanitarian, compassionate perspective. This is where Let me give you an example to better understand. The past unfolded in a certain way. We have certain facts and figures, but yet Saturn in the sign of Pisces will tell us how to alchemize that. For example, forgiveness. For example, not really putting the emphasis on victimization, Pisces, on, the drowning effect of this sign, because Pisces rules water, emotion or a certain kind of psychological setup can be extremely drowning. It can be like a fog, where because of the fog of the past, of the emotions of the past, we cannot see the truth, we cannot see beyond. Now, Saturn helps with all of that, because ultimately Saturn is the planet of discipline, planet where we have to take responsibility, planet of labor and work, where if we want to change something, we can change it by working, by sacrificing, by inputting a kind of effort into it. Oh, I'm so very sorry, because I just realized that I made a mistake. The moon sextiles Saturn and the sun trines Saturn. So let me put it in the right context. A sextile means exactly that, taking action. A sextile is activated by doing something, or sometimes inaction, not doing something. And we can very well see what the action could be, humanitarian act, or Saturn trine the moon in the sign of Taurus, speaking a certain kind of truth which represents compassion, which represents the superiority of the human spirit, where the human spirit, by its very, very nature, by its divine design, is meant to be benevolent and definitely not so destructive. Now, of course, Pisces is dual. Destruction is also part, but this is where we have a choice, including collectively. Now, Saturn trining, this is the correct way, trining the sun in the sign of Scorpio, this does represent that we alchemize the past. We alchemize the collective feeling. We, for example, find forgiveness, or something that we collectively decide upon becomes the truth rather than the heavy emotions of the past. So this trine, Sun trine Saturn, and Moon sextile Saturn gives a lot of hope, especially that after the reset, symbolically speaking, there comes light, there comes truth, there comes fresh and new emotion that can do a lot of good. And ultimately, this can also represent the opposition of Jupiter and the Mercury and Mars conjunction. Why? Because, as I said, an opposition is really depending on where we emphasize the balance. If we necessarily want to solve a situation, we will find a way, both legally, both within resources, Jupiter in the sign of Taurus, and also, the sun in the sign of, sorry, not the sun, Mercury and Mars in the sign of Scorpio, which can represent, methodology. We will find the correct or a very, very efficient modus operandi, and there will be no stopping that modus operandi. Now, another aspect, which is, a minor aspect, let me just show you. This is where we can see that the moon holds a trine. This was the moon's trine, with a grouping of dwarf planets, actually a dwarf planet and an asteroid. And this trine is quite precise, the moon being at 5 degrees of the sign of Taurus, and these planets being at 6 degrees of the sign of Capricorn. And we are speaking about asteroid Pholus and dwarf planet Quaoar. Now, first of all, let's examine the symbolism of Pholus. Now, Pholus was a centaur, very similar to Chiron in the sense that he wasn't a savage. And even according to some legends, his physical depiction wasn't the typical centaur, where half horse and waist up man, but rather, just like Chiron, he had much, much more human elements even to his body. He was a very, very peaceful centaur living in a cave, and according to the legends, he was a very good friend, a mate of Hercules. Now, unfortunately, just like Chiron, Pholus suffered a horrible wound, but due to his own curiosity, because in his attempt to help in a battle, a healer just like Chiron, just that Pholus wasn't divine. Chiron was an immortal divine being, where Pholus was just a centaur, but there is a strong similarity between the two. So anyway, he wanted to aid a battle, and he was studying an arrow or spear or lance, depending on the legend, infused with a hydra poison, which could kill. So he was studying that how could a little bit of stick, an arrow or a dart, cause immediate death. Well, he found out by being injured by it. And this is where his curiosity, or better said, his ignorance, or better said, his bold movement, caused his demise, where Chiron, of course, had a totally different story. But still, there is a similarity between Pholus and Chiron. So where I'm going with this is that the symbolism of Pholus, in a very positive sense, is boldness. This is where your condition does not stop you to take certain actions and taking on the potential risk. The negative symbolism of Pholus is, of course, that curiosity or boldness can result in one's downfall. Yet we must not forget its benevolent nature. Now, Quaoar, of course, is a guardian deity, a creational deity. So these two, I don't want to say planets, these two astrological elements conjunct together do represent a very, very strong protective element. So the moon trining them, their union, to me, it represents that there are certain people in positions of power, or certain people who have authority, Capricorn ultimately, who really want to solve the situation and are going to risk everything to help. So I really, really love this symbolism. Now, of course, there is another dwarf planet mixed in this, but that is where the trine is much, much more imprecise than the trine with Pholus and Quaoar, and that is Ixion. Ixion being another, I don't want to say centaur, because he was actually the father of centaurs. Ixion raped a cloud goddess who resembled Hera, so he was punished. He really, really evoked the wrath of Zeus, yet he gave birth to the race of centaurs, the savage and war-obsessed centaurs that, I mentioned earlier. So immediately, this rings a bell, because the savage and war-obsessed centaurs play out in a very clear way on the world stage. And centaur, Sagittarius, for example, does represent religious fanaticism. And if we put it in the right context, every side is religiously motivated, if that even makes sense. But still, Ixion in itself represents lawlessness. It represents, like a rebellion, but not of the righteous kind. A rebellion of, I'm not even sure which words to use here. This is where he has absolutely no remorse, no shame, no moral compass, no moral standards. Yet, the positive side of Ixion is that ultimately, with the right boldness, with the right, initiative, anything is possible. So it's a trine after all. So this also gives me hope that in the name of, again, moon in the sign of Taurus, basic needs and humanitarian action, anything is possible. So even if the situation looks doomy and gloomy, still there might be a lot of good and a lot of positivity that can be done. There can be saving graces without a shadow of a doubt. Now, let us ignore the collective situation because ultimately this eclipse affects all of us individually speaking. So, where does this 5 degree of Taurus and respectively Scorpio fall into your personal chart? And if you don't know what I'm speaking about, I do have a tutorial video how to look at your own chart. If you'd like, check it out. So that is where this might impact us in a very strong manner because this is the last eclipse that we have in the sign of Taurus for quite a long time, the next 8 to 9 years. So this truly finishes something because it's the last eclipse and it's also a lunar eclipse, meaning the culmination and closure. No, this is where the Taurian karma, in that sense, for us individually speaking, really, really needs to come to a culmination, whatever this means for us personally. Now, if you have any planets at around close to these degrees or close to 5 degrees of the fixed signs or earth signs, this may impact you much more, how should I say, personally. But still, all of us will have this moon very close to Jupiter in the sign of Taurus, wherever that falls to us. So this may represent justice. This may represent our belief. This may represent our, how should I say, view of our situation. And Taurus has a lot to do with material situation, self-worth, everything basically that delights our five senses, our how should I say, our desire for stability. So that all of these keywords may be linked to how this eclipse plays out in your personal life. Now we must remember that it is an eclipse, so there is a reset of some kind. And as I said, this may go hand in hand with us needing to release old values, us needing to release an old worldview or an old belief of our situation. May it, and of course, this eclipse is ruled by Venus because it takes place in her sign. And Venus at the time of this eclipse is in the earth sign of Virgo. So it's really, really practical and it means business in a down to earth and concrete way. And this may represent a clarity that might reach us after a moment of darkness. And when I say darkness, let's not understand this in a dramatic way, but something happens which, let's say, for a very short moment blocks us. Or there is some kind of very small crisis in our lives which leads us to a revelation, which leads us to a truth that we are no longer confused about, and that may guide us furthermore to an important decision, a change of our, as I said, perspective, worldview, belief, self-worth, how we feel about things. And that change ultimately will be the building block of something positive that will follow. And for many people, this Jupiter may represent that this might be even reflected legally or a legally binding, as I said, choice or consequence, etc., etc. And the legally binding element, is that we have the south node in the sign of Libra, which is, planet, the sign of justice and the law. And on the other side, very many times, Ixion also has to do with the law in a sense of lawlessness. So this may eclipse some kind of lawlessness, which is really, really positive. But going back to Venus, Venus herself at the time of the full moon / eclipse also holds quite a precise aspect, a trine with Uranus. And this is where Uranus is also in Venus's home sign of Taurus. So this to me says a positive, sudden, unexpected turnaround of the situation. Venus trining, better said, Uranus trining Venus can represent a saving grace, an unexpected hope, an unexpected aid or help, change of heart, change of the situation, or something external causes a change for the better. And of course, we cannot forget that Uranus is also the planet of uprising, rebellion, where the truth can simply not be ignored by anything or anyone. No, Uranus is very, very linked to the French Revolution. That it was where the truth of the people could not be undermined by any earthly authority. So this again bears a lot of hope, even though Venus herself is not all that very comfortable in the sign of Virgo, yet the practicality of it is something that all of us need. And because it is in an earth sign, this trine, Uranus in Taurus and Venus in Virgo, this can represent very, very quick practical help. So the situation can get better in a real sense very, very quickly. And, Virgo also rules anything that has to do with nutrition and food and, basic needs, but in a very different way than Taurus. For example, the provision of it, providing it through logistics and all of that. So that is a saving grace without a shadow of a doubt. And individually speaking, again, this can represent a lot of practicality which comes in our favor. For example, an unexpected gift, an unexpected help, unexpected offer, like job offer, alliance, anything that has to do with a solution to a situation where you have a need or you have a desire to advance or to move further. Venus in the sign of Virgo, and this is where Venus is what I really love about Virgo Venus is that she doesn't really care about empty promises and philosophy and anything that is not down to earth. So that's really, really a positive element here. Another thing that is really, really positive is that at the time of the eclipse, but of course, this is like a longer term ongoing energy, yet still we are getting the last expression of this because, as I said, in January next year, Pluto moves on in the sign of Aquarius. So it will break this aspect that I'm going to mention now. Pluto holds a sextile with with Neptune. So that represents the power of alchemy. That represents the power of manifestation. Neptune's highest expression is the power of love, power of compassion, total non-discrimination, the spirit of communion. Our differences don't matter all that much because in spirit, all of us are one. So you can imagine how this can help. You can imagine how this gives us already a strong spiritual power. Now, Uranus in the sign of Taurus also holds a sextile with Neptune. Of course, in Uranus's case, the sextile is very, very wide and not all that powerful, but still the truth within our hearts, a certain kind of, epiphany, realization can truly change the situation. Because, Neptune is also planet of confusion. It is also planet which makes the truth extremely subjective. Uranus is the opposite. Uranus is the planet of the, symbolically speaking, the cold, hard truth descending, coming down, no ignoring it. And the sextile means that the truth that is in our hearts can really, really change the situation. It can charge Neptune. Even though Neptune is the strongest planet from the two, yet still the truth can, and this is where Uranus is the earthly truth, the truth of a situation can change, the subjectivity of Neptune, especially in the sign of Pisces, because Neptune can be self-victimization or actually just victimhood. But it can also be, as I said, the epitome of humanitarianism. And Uranus is also planet which governs humanitarianism. So all of this gives a lot of hope without a shadow of a doubt. And this positivity can play out in our individual lives as well, because this gives us the power of alchemy. Whatever is our perspective of the truth that we cannot ignore, Uranus is the truth that we cannot ignore. It is the reality of our situation. Wherever this Taurus falls into your own personal chart, especially the 21 degree of Taurus where Uranus is in the present moment, that might represent, well, this is the undeniable truth of my situation, the facts. But Uranus, because it's retrograde, it also represents the truth that is buried. For example, potentials, resources, skills, intelligence, super intelligence that we are not using. And that can change our situation so very much because it charges Neptune. And Neptune gives us the choice. What are we focusing upon? Everything that hinders us and we do not have, or everything that we can potentially have, and which is not just, wishful thinking, because exactly as I said, Uranus comes with the facts. If we have a hidden potential, or if we have things that we are not using, well, that is still truth. Even if you're not used, we have it there. So take in sextile, taking action, in bold action, courageous action, because all of that are, promoted by Uranus, can really, really change our situation and how we feel about, and our collective feeling. It can be really changed. So these two sextiles are the, how should I say, the Joker cards, where they give us the power of alchemy, power of faith, and power of our own sovereignty, which can even change reality, because reality is just a mirror of whatever is happening inside of us. Now, another element that does give me hope is that Mars, at the time of the eclipse, is conjunct a fixed star named a crux. Maybe I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, so I'm really sorry about that. But that fixed star rules occult sciences and the overall power of spirituality and even research and knowledge and practical, how should I say, usage, if that makes sense, of the occult, spiritual, etc., psychology. And Mars, is the planet of action. So this to me says that our spiritual input and us trying to help the situation spiritually can do a lot of good. Now, of course, this can have the backlash, because this can play out the opposite way. Those people who want harm and the lower scorpionic expression, of course, they will empower it in their way. So this is where it is our duty collectively to use this conjunction in the positive way, if that makes sense. Now, individually speaking, this is where what can our spiritual knowledge, our occult research, our knowledge about psychology and parapsychology, Scorpio, how can that improve any situation? Because Mars is the planet of action. If we have a ritual, if we have a certain kind of understanding how to influence reality, well, this encourages us to use that. Perhaps not necessarily at the moment of the eclipse, because generally speaking, an eclipse is where we have no power anymore. A short window of time where it's just karma and the divine forces and not really us. But as I said, the Mars conjunct this fixed star is not necessarily tied to the eclipse. So ignoring the window of time of the eclipse, that energy can still be used, like a charm, because it really is a charm. Now, there are other aspects, minor aspects, which may influence us in a not so favorable sense, but these are just psychological. These are irritants. These are aspects of frustration and a tiny bit of confusion, inner confusion, when we are not sure exactly even how to feel about a situation or something. And that is Jupiter holding a semi-square with Neptune. So this does mean that the fact that we don't know what is true, not exactly, I didn't use the correct word. The fact that we don't know what justice is, what true justice is, we simply cannot tell at the present moment. That frustrates us, that irritates us. And this may play out very personally in our lives as well, because there might be a situation where you just don't know, for example, what the right thing to do would be, what the equitable and fair thing to do would be. There might be situations where we simply do not know, especially with emotional things, relationships. If you say no, for example, to someone, will you hurt their feelings? And is hurting their feelings a risk worthy of being taken just to express a subjective truth of yours? You know what I mean? So this can be quite irritating. And the other aspect is that Mercury holds a sesqui-square, a sesqui-quadrate, also with Neptune. But that is a much more constructive aspect, because the frustration of not really being able to tell and judge what justice and truth is uh, guides us to the fact that we have to listen to down to earth logic. Mercury in the sign of Scorpio, that is very much down to earth logic, investigative energy. So our rational approach really, really, really helps. And rational approach also invites us not to listen to external events, external communication, how events are presented externally, but rather to go deep within ourselves, and not even in a philosophical way, but rather in a rational, analytical, down-to-earth way, and make up our minds what a situation or thing means to us personally. Now, I know that I emphasize the collective expression of this energy much more than the personal one, but the personal one can be really put in a nutshell. A lunar eclipse in Taurus represents a certain kind of reset in a material or earthly situation that was very ongoing, very much ongoing in our lives. For example, either the past 18 years or 9 years or anything like that. So quite a long time. And this can be understood like a state, a value system which was fixed and rigid, which once may have been very reflective of the truth, but no longer. Or it can represent a psychological energy where it's about love or worth or self-esteem or correctly judging. But when I say judging, it's not the bad kind. Our talents and skills and everything that is internal, or our needs. Maybe our needs were in a certain way, as I said some time ago, but now this eclipse may reflect to us that our present needs and our future needs are totally different than they once were. Now, we cannot ignore the Mercury and conjunct Mars opposing Jupiter in Taurus, uh, because this can represent like a purge. This can represent, where a hermit crab discards a shell which is too small for him and will have to ultimately go expose himself, put himself into risk, and to find a new shell, to find something much, much more suitable for his present need. So this might cause a small moment of financial crisis on the world stage without a shadow of a doubt, but also in our personal lives, especially that Uranus in the sign of Taurus, when it's activated, and it is activated, it might cause a need to abandon an old situation, even if that puts us in a uncomfortable situation. For example, a small window of time when financially we are just in scarcity, but we know that this scarcity will change once we get what we need, once we accomplish the reason why we abandoned the old, why we abandoned the stability which was no longer working for us. But at the same time, an eclipse can play out in the opposite way, where karma hands you something, where karma gifts you something, where you harvest the fruits of your labor, because that can also be part of a full moon slash lunar eclipse. You may ask yourself, well, how is that a reset? There was, let's say, a situation in the past, and now the karmic forces are handing you the final conclusion, which may be a harvest, but that resets it, as in the situation ends. There you go, you have your harvest, and that's it. You have no more harvest. In that sense, the past is closed. So this energy in that sense can be very, very healing, even if, as I said, it may come uncomfortably, because that can be the nature of any eclipse. So thank you everyone for listening. I do hope that this made a little bit of sense, and I'm really, really sorry that, I just couldn't find my words, and I'm really, really wasn't feeling fit to record this horoscope, because all of us feel the heaviness, all of us feel the pressure, and all of us feel the collective suffering, empathy basically. So I'm really, really sorry that I wasn't in the best possible shape, and that I swallowed my words, and I couldn't express my analysis very, very clearly and coherently. So thank you everyone, and until next time, bye for now.